Imagine standing on a wooden deck. The air is freezing, but your heart is warm with ambition. You are surrounded by cheers, a bustling port, and the promise of ultimate glory. You are about to conquer the last blank space on the world map. Now, imagine that just a few months later, that same ocean turns to solid, crushing stone. The journey completely stops. The cold creeps into your bones. The silence becomes so heavy it feels like a physical weight. How does the human mind survive when every single plan goes wrong? Why do some people surrender to the darkness, while others find a way to navigate through it? This is not just a tale of frozen oceans and wooden ships. This is the story of our internal compass. It is the story of why we fall into deep negativity and how we can learn to steer ourselves out of it. We will explore the psychological traps of stress cycles, social comparison, and learned helplessness by following one of the greatest survival stories in human history. As we travel back to the ice of Antarctica, we will also practice something vital: your English. We're going to build your vocabulary, improve your speaking confidence, and learn the language of human endurance. By understanding history, we understand ourselves. By learning new English words in context, you gain the exact tools needed to express your own complex inner world. The year is 1914. The world is changing rapidly. Across Europe, the dark clouds of the First World War are gathering. But in London, an explorer named Sir Ernest Shackleton is focused on a different kind of battle. He has a bold vision: the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. His goal is to cross the entire continent of Antarctica on foot, from sea to sea, passing directly through the South Pole. He gathers a crew of 27 men, along with 69 sled dogs, and a ship perfectly named for the journey. The ship is called the Endurance. Listen for this word: endurance. In English, the noun endurance means the ability to suffer through a difficult process or situation without giving up. It comes from the verb to endure. When you learn English, you need endurance. When you face challenges in life, you need endurance. Shackleton named his ship after his own family motto, which was, "By endurance we conquer." It is a powerful phrase you can use in your own daily reflections. By endurance we conquer our fears. By endurance we master a new language. In August of 1914, the Endurance sails south, leaving the safety of the known world behind. The men are highly optimistic. They have a strong mindset. Mindset is a very important term for us. A mindset is the established set of attitudes or beliefs held by a person. If you have a positive mindset, you believe you can overcome obstacles. The crew of the Endurance believes they will achieve their goal within a year. They expect hardship, but they also expect victory. However, nature does not care about human expectations. By January of 1915, the ship enters the Weddell Sea off the coast of Antarctica. This is a brutal, unforgiving stretch of water. It is heavily populated by pack ice, massive floating blocks of frozen seawater. Historical records show that the ice was unusually thick that year. As the ship pushes further south, the ice begins to close around the wooden hull. The water freezes faster than the ship can move. On January 18, 1915, the Endurance becomes completely stuck. The ocean literally freezes solid around them. They are trapped. This moment marks a sudden, shocking shift. This is where the biological and psychological reality of stress begins. Let us look closely at what happens inside the human body when a trap snaps shut. Human biology is designed to handle stress, but only in short bursts. Imagine our ancient ancestors. If a wild animal attacks, the brain sends a massive wave of adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream. Your heart beats faster. Your breathing becomes shallow. You either fight the animal or run away. This is called a stress cycle. Once you escape, the cycle completes. Your body calms down. The stress is over. But what happens when the threat is not a wild animal? What happens when the threat is an endless ocean of ice that traps you for months? You cannot fight the ice. You cannot run away from the ice. The stress cycle cannot close. The adrenaline and cortisol stay in your system. This is an open stress cycle, and it is the exact reason why people begin to become deeply negative. When your body is in constant alarm, your brain begins to search everywhere for danger. Listen for this phrase: constant alarm. This means a continuous, unbroken state of fear or readiness. When we live in constant alarm, whether from an intense job, difficult studies, or a frozen ocean, our thoughts naturally turn dark. We lose our optimism because biology forces us to focus on threats. For the 28 men on the Endurance, the physical trap creates an enormous psychological trap. The ship is no longer moving forward. The great expedition is paralyzed. The sounds of the ship also change. Instead of the rhythmic splashing of waves, there is only the terrifying groan of thick ice pressing against the wooden sides of the ship. The men wait for days, hoping the ice will melt. Days turn into weeks. The temperature drops lower and lower. The men realize with a creeping dread that the ice will not open. They are stranded. To be stranded means to be left without the means to move from a place. It is a feeling of total helplessness. Shackleton, as the leader, faces a monumental crisis. He watches his men. He sees the early signs of mental fatigue. He knows that if he allows the open stress cycle to consume his crew, they will turn on each other. The cold will not kill them first. Their own negativity, fear, and panic will. They are trapped thousands of miles from human civilization with no radio, no hope of rescue, and limited food. And something even more terrifying is approaching. In Antarctica, winter does not just bring colder temperatures, it brings darkness. The sun is sinking lower on the horizon every single day. Soon, it will disappear completely, leaving the men in absolute blackness for months. How will the crew survive the long polar night? When the light vanishes and resources shrink, how does the human mind resist the urge to compare, complain, and collapse? What happens to our language and our thoughts when we are plunged into the dark? The sun hovers on the horizon like a pale, freezing coin. Then, on May 1st, 1915, it completely vanishes. The long, polar night has arrived. For the next 4 months, the men of the Endurance will not see the sun. They are plunged into 24 hours of continuous, absolute darkness, surrounded by millions of square miles of frozen, shifting sea. Try to imagine the profound psychological weight of that shadow. When the physical lights go out, the human mind often begins to play tricks on itself. Inside the trapped wooden ship, the 28 men are forced to move out of their normal cabins. It is simply too cold. They relocate to the lower decks, deep inside the belly of the ship, for shared warmth. They sarcastically name their cramped new living space the Ritz, after the famous luxury hotel in London. The temperature outside drops to 30 degrees below zero. Inside, the men huddle together, listening to the agonizing groans of the ice pressure outside. It sounds like giant freight trains crashing in the distance. Listen for this phrase: close quarters. In English, living in close quarters means living in a very small, confined space with other people, where privacy is entirely impossible. When you live in close quarters under high stress, every small habit of your neighbor becomes magnified. A loud cough, a specific way of chewing food, or a sudden sigh can become incredibly annoying. This physical environment is the perfect breeding ground for negative thought patterns. In the dark, our brains naturally search for meaning. But when we are trapped in an open stress cycle, our brains search for negativity. This introduces a very dangerous psychological trap. It is called confirmation bias. Listen for this core word carefully: bias. In psychology, a bias is an unfair or automatic preference for or against something. Confirmation bias is the human tendency to only notice and remember information that proves what we already deeply believe. If you are learning English, and you secretly believe your speaking skills are terrible, confirmation bias takes over. You will intensely remember the one time you made a grammar mistake. You will completely ignore the 10 times you spoke perfectly and were easily understood. Your brain confirms your negative belief and filters out your success. For the men trapped in the dark Antarctic ice, confirmation bias is a deadly enemy. If a sailor begins to believe they are doomed to die, his brain filters the environment for proof. He will listen to the cracking wood and think, the ship is breaking apart today. He will see a tired sled dog and think, we are running out of food. He ignores the fact that the ship's hull is still incredibly strong and they still possess months of supplies. Negative thoughts act like a highly contagious virus in close quarters. This negativity is quickly accelerated by another toxic human habit: social comparison. Social comparison is when we determine our own personal worth based on how we measure against others. In the Ritz, the men inevitably start looking at each other's meager resources. Did he get a slightly bigger piece of meat? They examine each other's emotional states. Why is he smiling? Doesn't he know how dangerous this is? When we constantly compare ourselves to others during a crisis or during a difficult learning journey, we generate resentment. Resentment is a bitter anger at being treated unfairly. It destroys teamwork. It destroys motivation. If you compare your English progress to a native speaker, or to a student who has studied for 10 years, you will trigger social comparison. You will feel inadequate. You will feel negative. Historians note that Sir Ernest Shackleton possessed a brilliant, almost modern level of emotional intelligence. He observes his crew closely. He understands that idle hands and silent minds will quickly destroy his men. He knows he absolutely cannot control the ice. He cannot bring back the sun. But he can control the daily rhythm of life. He decides to fight confirmation bias and social comparison with a very powerful psychological weapon. He enforces a strict, unbreakable routine. A routine is a regular sequence of actions. Shackleton demands that the men wake up at the exact same time every single day. They must scrub and clean the wooden decks of the ship. They must go out into the freezing blackness to exercise and carefully feed the dogs. They eat meals at precise hours. After dinner, he forces them to socialize. They are required to play card games, listen to a mechanical gramophone, and sing loud songs together. Why does he do this? He is deliberately forcing the men to step out of their internal negative loops. By creating a rigid external structure, Shackleton provides his crew with a vital sense of control. This is a crucial lesson for anyone trying to build optimism or master a difficult skill like English. When you feel overwhelmed, your mind spirals into chaotic anxiety. A daily routine interrupts that chaos. When you practice daily reflection, perhaps sitting down for just 5 minutes each evening to write a short journal entry in English about what you achieved today, you are doing exactly what Shackleton did. You are forcing your brain to focus on the present action, not the terrifying, uncertain future. You are building resilience. Resilience is a beautiful core word in the English language. It means the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It is mental toughness. Resilience is not a magical gift you are born with. It is a muscle you build through daily habit. Shackleton is building resilience in his men by keeping them busy. He makes them mop the floors while they are trapped at the bottom of the world. It seems absurd to clean a trapped ship, but it works. The routine keeps the darkness out of their minds. The men successfully survive the brutal winter. Finally, in August, the sun returns, painting the endless ice in brilliant shades of pink and gold. The crew cheers. They have survived the long night. They survived themselves. But the ocean has a different plan. The returning sun begins to slightly warm the vast fields of ice. As the temperature shifts, millions of tons of frozen sea begin to actively move. The ocean is waking up, and the Endurance is trapped directly in its massive jaws. The wooden ship begins to bend under the unimaginable pressure. Freezing water starts to pour in. Routine and resilience can protect the mind, but they cannot stop the crushing physical weight of nature. What happens when the only safe home you have is slowly destroyed right before your eyes? The sound of screaming wood is loud enough to wake the dead. Your only safe harbor has suddenly become a crushing trap. The floor beneath your feet is bending upward, and freezing black water is rapidly pouring into the lower decks. What do you do when the walls that protect you suddenly begin to destroy you? It is October of 1915. The sun is back, but it brings no warmth, only movement and destruction. As the weather slightly shifts, the Weddell Sea becomes a grinding machine of immense pressure. Millions of tons of pack ice push against the Endurance. The massive timber beams of the ship, built specifically to withstand heavy ice, begin to bend and snap like dry twigs. For days, the crew fights desperately to save their home. They pump freezing water out of the engine room until their muscles burn and their hands bleed. They barely sleep. They fight against the inevitable. But on October 27th, 1915, the terrible fight is finally over. The ice pierces the sides of the ship, tearing the hull completely open. Sir Ernest Shackleton looks at the absolute ruin of his great dream. The expedition is dead. He gathers his exhausted men on the freezing deck. He does not scream. He does not panic. He speaks quietly and firmly to his crew. He says, "She's going, boys. It's time to get off." Listen for this important English verb, to abandon. It means to leave a place, a thing, or a person, usually forever, because it is impossible or dangerous to stay. The crew must abandon the ship. They must leave their warm stoves, their beds, and their safety, and step down onto the raw, unstable surface of the frozen ocean. This is the exact moment where a catastrophic event often triggers a devastating psychological condition. It is a concept discovered by modern psychologists, and it is called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness occurs when a person experiences repeated, uncontrollable failure or pain, and eventually simply stops trying to escape. When you feel that nothing you do matters, your brain shuts down its survival instincts. You become completely passive. Let us carefully define this word, passive. Being passive means accepting what happens to you without an active response or any resistance. If you are passive in your English learning, you simply wait for a teacher to pour knowledge into your head, and you give up when grammar becomes difficult. If you are passive in a deadly survival situation, you freeze, sit down in the snow, and wait to die. The loss of the endurance is the ultimate trigger for learned helplessness. The men have lost their home. They have lost their mission. They are standing on floating ice hundreds of miles from any human being. It would be incredibly easy for their minds to surrender to a negative bias, the automatic assumption that death is now certain. However, Shackleton understands that the human mindset is fragile, and it must be managed immediately. He knows that if the men stop moving, they will start despairing, so he refuses to let them be passive. He instantly creates a brand new mission. He completely changes the narrative. He tells his crew, "Ship and stores have gone, so now we'll go home." This is a masterclass in a vital mental habit. Listen for this term, to reframe. To reframe means to change the way you look at a situation in order to change how you feel about it. Shackleton does not say, "We have lost everything and we are stranded." He reframes the catastrophe. He essentially says, "Our destination has changed. We are no longer explorers. We are survivors walking home." By reframing the disaster, he protects his crew's resilience. He gives them back their sense of control. You can practice this exact habit in your own life. When you feel overwhelmed by a massive task, like speaking English fluently, do not look at the whole terrifying mountain. Reframe your thoughts. Repeat this short, powerful phrase to yourself. Focus on the next step. Do not worry about a perfect accent today. Focus on the next step. Learn one new vocabulary word. Read one short story prompt. Write one sentence of gratitude. By focusing only on immediate action, you defeat learned helplessness. Shackleton forces his men to focus on the next step. They pitch small canvas tents on the floating ice. They proudly call this freezing settlement Ocean Camp. Over the next few days, they return to the sinking, crushed wreck of the Endurance to salvage what they can. Listen for this word, to salvage. It means to rescue a ship or its cargo from loss at sea, or to save something from a bad situation. They salvage basic food, heavy sleeping bags, and 3 small, open wooden lifeboats. These lifeboats are their only hope of eventually crossing the open ocean, if they ever reach it. Shackleton then makes a shocking, highly symbolic decision. He orders the men to abandon all unnecessary, heavy items. Weight is now the enemy. To demonstrate his absolute commitment to this new reality, Shackleton takes out his heavy, valuable gold watch. He drops it silently into the freezing snow. He throws away handfuls of gold coins. He is showing his men that money, past status, and old ambitions have zero value here. The only currency that matters now is survival. Yet there is one item Shackleton allows a crew member to keep. It is a banjo, a musical instrument. He calls it vital mental medicine. He knows that music and stories will keep their minds alive when the physical world tries to crush them. The men have survived the death of their ship. They have maintained their mindset and reframed their reality. But their situation is incredibly precarious. They are living in thin tents on a massive, drifting piece of ice. The Antarctic summer is slowly approaching. The temperature is rising, and the ice beneath their boots is beginning to crack, melt, and dissolve. How do you survive when the very ground you are sleeping on begins to disappear into the dark ocean? Imagine sleeping on a frozen floor that is constantly shrinking. Every single morning when you wake up, the edges of your world have dissolved into the dark, freezing ocean. Your safety is literally melting away. It is late November 1915. The crushed wreck of the Endurance finally slips entirely beneath the ice. The 28 men watch in silence as their beautiful ship disappears into the Weddell Sea forever. They are now completely alone on a massive floating piece of ice called a floe. As the Antarctic summer approaches, the temperatures rise slightly. The ice floe begins to slowly move north, carried by deep ocean currents. Listen for this important verb: to drift. To drift means to be carried slowly by a current of air or water, without any control over your direction. The men are drifting. They are moving, but they are not steering. They are completely at the mercy of the ocean. Have you ever felt like you are drifting in your English studies? You study vocabulary, you listen to podcasts, but you feel like you have no real control over your progress. You are moving, but you do not know where you are going. This psychological state is incredibly dangerous. When we drift for too long, we lose our motivation. We fall back into a negative mindset. Shackleton recognizes this danger immediately. He knows that sitting on the ice and watching it melt will destroy the men's minds. He attempts to march the crew across the frozen sea toward solid land. They drag the heavy wooden lifeboats across jagged, broken ridges of ice. It is exhausting, brutal work. After days of extreme physical agony, they calculate their distance. Because the ice is drifting in the opposite direction, their forward progress is almost zero. They have walked for miles, but the ocean has pushed them backward. They are forced to stop and set up a new home on the ice. Shackleton names it Patience Camp. Listen for this word, plateau. A plateau is a state of little or no change following a period of intense activity or progress. When you learn a complex skill like a language, you will inevitably hit a plateau. You study hard, but you suddenly feel like you are not improving at all. You feel stuck. You are at Patience Camp. How do you survive a plateau without losing your resilience? How do you prevent your brain from slipping back into a destructive stress cycle? When there is no forward movement to celebrate, you must actively manufacture positive momentum in your mind. Shackleton does this by enforcing an attitude of active waiting. He does not allow the men to be passive. They must constantly maintain the 3 lifeboats. They must hunt for seals and penguins to ensure they have enough meat and fat to survive. But most importantly, they must maintain morale. Morale is the confidence, enthusiasm, and discipline of a person or group. To maintain your own morale during a long learning plateau, you need a daily habit that forcefully interrupts confirmation bias. We discussed confirmation bias earlier, the habit of only seeing evidence that you are failing. To fight it, you can use a powerful psychological tool, a gratitude practice. Listen for this core noun, gratitude. Gratitude is the quality of being thankful and showing appreciation for what you have. In modern psychology, gratitude is not just a soft, happy emotion. It is a biological reset button. When you actively search your environment for something positive, you force your brain to step out of the stress cycle. You lower your cortisol levels. Try this simple, repeatable phrase in your own daily reflection. Today, I am grateful for my effort. Notice that you are not grateful for perfection. You are not grateful for a flawless English accent. You are grateful for the effort. You control your effort, not the ocean. If you write down 3 small things you are grateful for every evening, perhaps a new English word you understood, a warm cup of coffee, or a moment of quiet, you actively train your brain to notice success instead of failure. At Patience Camp, the men find strange things to be grateful for. They are grateful for an extra piece of seal blubber. They are grateful for a song played on the banjo. They are grateful for a day when the wind is not screaming in their ears. They survive on the ice floe for months, practicing ultimate patience, hunting, and waiting for the ice to drift far enough north to reach open water. But patience has a physical limit. By April of 1916, they have been drifting on the ice for nearly 5 months. The floe they are living on was once a massive, solid island. Now it has melted and broken apart so many times that it is no larger than a small city park. The edges are crumbling into the sea. The psychological tension is unbearable. The men sleep in their boots, terrified of what the night might bring. They know the ice is becoming too fragile to hold them. Then, the true nightmare begins. It happens in the pitch blackness of an April night. The men are sleeping in their thin canvas tents. Suddenly, a deafening crack echoes through the camp. The ice floe splits directly underneath one of the tents. The ground tears open. A sailor named Holness drops instantly into the freezing black ocean, trapped inside his sleeping bag. The freezing water rushes over him. The two halves of the broken ice begin to violently smash back together. If he is not pulled out immediately, he will be crushed to death. Shackleton, sleeping nearby, hears the noise and rushes to the edge of the crack. The waiting is over. The ice is gone. The open ocean is finally here. But how will 28 men survive the most violent waters on Earth in 3 tiny, open wooden boats? A man plunges into the freezing blackness. The ice is closing like a giant pair of jaws. In the terrible darkness of that April night, Sir Ernest Shackleton hears the splash and the desperate cry. He sprints to the edge of the crack in the ice. He looks down into the freezing water and sees the sailor, Holness, trapped inside his heavy sleeping bag, struggling to breathe. Without a second of hesitation, Shackleton reaches down into the dark water. He grabs the soaking wet canvas of the sleeping bag. With a massive, frantic heave, he pulls the man up onto the frozen surface. Less than a second later, the 2 massive blocks of ice smash back together with a sickening crunch. If Shackleton had been 1 moment slower, Holness would have been crushed instantly. Listen for this verb, to plunge. It means to fall or jump suddenly from a high place, or to suddenly experience a terrible situation. When you learn a new language, you often feel like you are plunging into cold water. It is a shock to your system. Your brain panics. But surviving a sudden plunge requires immediate, decisive action. You cannot freeze in fear. For the men of the Endurance, the sudden plunge of their crewmate is the final warning. The ice floe is completely shattering. Their temporary drifting home is destroying itself. They can no longer practice passive waiting. Shackleton gives the ultimate order. It is time to take to the boats. On April 9th, 1916, they carefully push their 3 small, open wooden lifeboats into the freezing, treacherous waters of the Weddell Sea. The boats are named the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills. This moment of launching the boats is a profound shift in their psychological reality. For months, they were trapped in an open stress cycle, drifting slowly, forced to endure the agonizing habit of waiting. Now they are finally moving under their own power. They are fighting back. In psychology, taking immediate action is the single most effective way to defeat learned helplessness. When you are suffering from a negative mindset, your brain tells you that nothing you do will change the outcome. By grabbing the wooden oars and rowing, the men are telling their brains a new story. They are regaining a sense of agency. You can apply this directly to your own English journey. When you feel overwhelmed by a difficult grammar rule, or you feel terrified to speak, your brain wants you to shut down. Do not sit still. Take one small action. Write one single sentence. Speak one short phrase out loud. By doing this, you close the stress cycle. You remind your brain that you are still the captain of your own ship. But the ocean does not care about human courage. The moment the 3 small boats hit the open water, they are assaulted by the true fury of the Antarctic Sea. Listen for this word, swell. In the ocean, A swell is a long, slow, massive wave that moves continuously without breaking. It is a terrifying display of pure energy. The 3 tiny wooden boats are thrown wildly into the air by towering ocean swells, and then dropped down into deep, dark valleys of freezing water. The men must row with every ounce of their remaining strength. The temperature is so low that the sea spray freezes instantly when it hits their clothes. They are wearing suits of solid ice. They have almost no fresh water to drink, so their tongues swell in their mouths. They suffer from intense seasickness, hanging over the sides of the boats, in utter misery. Killer whales, massive predators with sharp teeth, frequently rise to the surface right next to their tiny wooden hulls. One strike from a whale's tail would instantly shatter a boat. How do you keep your mind from breaking when your body is in such profound physical agony? When social comparison and confirmation bias try to convince you that death is inevitable, what habit keeps you alive? You use a mental tool. You use short story prompts. Listen for this phrase carefully. Short story prompt. A prompt is a tiny imaginative idea or instruction used to start a thought process. English learners use short story prompts to practice writing. For example, a teacher might say, "Write a story about a key that opens an invisible door." That is a prompt. It gives the brain a specific direction. For the freezing men in the lifeboats, Shackleton provides a survival prompt. He points toward the horizon and gives them a single, focused idea. Elephant Island. Elephant Island is a brutal, remote piece of rock covered in glaciers. But it is land. It is solid ground. The mental prompt for the men becomes, "We will reach Elephant Island, and we will finally sleep." This short, vivid story becomes their entire world. They repeat it to themselves with every pull of the oars. It keeps their minds strictly focused on a positive outcome, actively pushing away the overwhelming negativity of their physical pain. Try this in your own daily practice. Give yourself a short story prompt about your future. I am walking into a cafe in London, and I am ordering my coffee in perfect, confident English. Visualize it. Speak it. Let that short story guide your daily effort. Let it build your resilience. For 7 agonizing days and nights, the men fight the terrible ocean swells. They bail freezing water out of the boats with their bare, bleeding hands. Some of the men begin to lose their grip on reality. The cold is shutting down their internal organs. Shackleton refuses to sleep, standing at the back of his boat, constantly watching the horizon. Listen for this verb, to steer. It means to control the direction of a vehicle or a boat. Shackleton steers his men through the darkest moments of their lives. He shouts encouragement over the roaring wind. He manages their mindset when their bodies are failing. Finally, on April 15th, 1916, a miracle happens. The heavy fog parts. Rising out of the violent gray sea is a towering, magnificent black rock. It is covered in ice, completely isolated, and utterly uninviting to normal human eyes. But to the men of the Endurance, it is the most beautiful sight in the world. They have found Elephant Island. They rowed desperately toward a narrow, rocky beach. For the first time in 497 days, they step off the shifting ice and the rolling sea, and they put their boots on solid land. The men literally collapse onto the freezing stones. Some are crying. Some are entirely silent. They survived the ocean. But as the adrenaline fades and they look around their new home, a terrifying realization sets in. Elephant Island is completely uninhabited. It is far outside any normal shipping lane. No rescue ship will ever pass by. This lonely rock. The men are safe from the ocean, but they have just landed in a permanent, inescapable prison. If they stay here, they will slowly starve to death. What impossible choice must Shackleton make next? You step onto solid rock after nearly 500 days on shifting ice and violent seas. You fall to your knees in pure relief, kissing the cold stones. But as your eyes adjust to the freezing fog, a horrific truth settles into your bones. You have not found salvation. You have merely found a solid place to disappear. Elephant Island is a jagged, brutal mountain of ice rising out of the dark ocean. It is utterly desolate. Listen for this word carefully. Desolate. As an adjective, desolate means a place that is completely empty, bare, and showing no signs of life. It also describes a feeling of complete misery and loneliness. When the 28 exhausted men of the Endurance look at their new home, they feel a profound sense of desolation. They are safe from the crushing waves, but they are entirely removed from any known shipping routes. No rescue ship will ever accidentally sail past this lonely rock. This moment represents a very specific psychological danger. It is the danger of the false finish line. The men have spent every ounce of their physical and mental energy just to reach land. Their bodies are broken. Their clothes are rotting. Now that the immediate adrenaline of the ocean crossing fades, a massive psychological crash occurs. When we strive for a difficult goal, like mastering the English language, we often imagine a finish line. We think, once I pass this test, I will feel confident. But when we reach that milestone and realize that true fluency still requires years of effort, our mindset can completely collapse. We are at risk of returning to learned helplessness. We are tempted to surrender. Listen for this verb, to succumb. It means to stop trying to resist something, usually a negative force, an illness, or a powerful emotion. On Elephant Island, some of the men begin to succumb to despair. They refuse to move. Their resilience is finally breaking under the weight of endless suffering. If they sit on the desolate beach and simply wait, confirmation bias will convince them that death is their only future. They will see every empty horizon as proof that they are forgotten. Sir Ernest Shackleton knows he cannot let his men succumb. He understands that passive waiting is a death sentence for the human mind. So he makes one of the most daring, impossible decisions in the history of human survival. He decides to leave the island. He will take the largest of their 3 small lifeboats, the 22-foot James Caird, and sail across the Drake Passage to reach a whaling station on South Georgia Island. This is not just a journey, it is a terrifying, calculated risk. Listen for this phrase, calculated risk. A calculated risk is a chance you take after carefully estimating the probability of a successful outcome. The Drake Passage is widely considered the most violent stretch of ocean on planet Earth. It is a place of endless hurricanes, massive swells, and freezing gales. To cross 800 miles of it in a tiny wooden rowboat borders on absolute madness. But Shackleton reframes the situation. He knows that certain death awaits them on the beach. A calculated risk on the ocean is their only mathematically possible chance of survival. He is choosing action over despair. You can use this exact philosophy when your own negativity tries to paralyze you. When you are terrified of making a mistake in an English conversation, your brain wants you to stay silent. Staying silent is sitting on the desolate beach. Instead, take a calculated risk. Speak one sentence. Make the mistake. Repeat this short, powerful phrase to yourself. Action cures fear. The moment you take action, you forcefully break the stress cycle. Shackleton selects 5 men to accompany him on this impossible voyage, choosing individuals for their specific physical and mental strength. Among them is Frank Worsley, a brilliant navigator who will have to guide them across the open ocean using only the stars and a small instrument called a sextant. They spend precious days modifying the tiny wooden boat. They build a makeshift canvas roof to cover the top, sealing it with seal blood and oil to keep the freezing water out. They carefully load exactly 4 weeks of food and water. Shackleton knows the brutal math. If they do not reach South Georgia Island in 4 weeks, they will starve, or the boat will be swallowed by the abyss. On April 24, 1916, the time for waiting ends. The 22 men who are staying behind stand on the rocky shore. They help push the James Caird into the violent surf. Shackleton waves a final goodbye, and the tiny boat disappears into the freezing mist of the Southern Ocean. This creates 2 massive, simultaneous tests of human endurance. For Shackleton and his 5 men, how do you survive an 800-mile hurricane in a wooden box, fighting monstrous waves and deep physical agony? And for the 22 men left behind on the desolate beach, how do you survive months of freezing darkness, wondering every single day if your leader is dead, without letting your mind succumb to the shadows? Imagine living inside a wooden washing machine, tumbling blindly through freezing black water, knowing that a single moment of rest means instant death. That is the reality for Sir Ernest Shackleton and his 5 men aboard the tiny James Caird. They are attempting the impossible, crossing the Drake Passage in the middle of the Antarctic winter. For the 22 men left behind on the desolate beach of Elephant Island, the nightmare is completely different, but equally terrifying. They must survive the absolute silence of waiting. The expedition has now split into 2 extreme psychological battlegrounds. One group faces the acute, violent stress of the ocean. The other faces the chronic, grinding stress of isolation. Both groups must fight the human mind's natural drift toward deep negativity. Let us first look at the violent turmoil of the ocean. Listen for this core noun. Turmoil. It means a state of great disturbance, confusion, or uncertainty. The Drake Passage is a place of endless physical turmoil. The ocean swells here are legendary. The men in the 22-foot boat are constantly thrown up the sides of 50-foot waves, hanging over the edge of the abyss before crashing down into dark valleys of freezing water. They face continuous, screaming winds. Listen for this word: gale. A gale is a very strong wind, often associated with violent storms. The gales of the Southern Ocean are so loud that the men cannot hear each other scream. When you learn English, you will inevitably face mental gales. You will experience days of emotional turmoil where every grammar rule seems confusing, and your confidence is completely thrown around. In those moments of linguistic turmoil, you must do exactly what the men in the boat did: focus on the immediate task. Inside the James Caird, the immediate task is bailing water. Freezing waves constantly wash over their makeshift canvas roof. The water leaks inside. If they do not continuously pump and scoop the water back out, the heavy boat will sink. Their hands are covered in agonizing saltwater boils. Their drinking water becomes contaminated with seawater, causing their throats to swell with thirst. Yet despite this supreme physical agony, their minds are strangely protected. Because they are fighting for their lives every single second, they have no time for social comparison. They have no energy for confirmation bias. Pure survival demands pure focus. Action leaves no room for despair. Meanwhile, back on Elephant Island, the psychological battle is much more dangerous. The 22 men are led by Shackleton's trusted second-in-command, Frank Wild. Wild faces a massive leadership challenge. His men are starving, freezing, and living under 2 upside-down wooden lifeboats they dragged onto the rocks. They call this dark, damp shelter the snuggery. Without the constant, immediate danger of an ocean crossing, the men on the island have too much time to think. They are trapped in a state of chronic stress. This is exactly when learned helplessness tries to take over. When humans wait in the dark, they naturally begin to assume the worst. They calculate the days. They whisper that the James Caird must have sunk. Frank Wild knows he must fight this invisible enemy. Listen for this valuable English phrasal verb: to stave off. It means to push away or delay something bad or dangerous. Wild must stave off the paralyzing negativity of his men. He does this by enforcing an aggressive, almost unbelievable daily habit of optimism. Every single morning, in the freezing darkness of the snuggery, Frank Wild wakes his men up with the exact same loud command. He shouts, "Roll up your sleeping bags, boys. The boss may come today." This is a profound psychological anchor. Wild does not say, "We might be rescued in a few months." He forces their minds to focus on today. By repeating this short, hopeful phrase, he actively combats the darkness. He gives them a daily story of rescue. You can use this exact strategy to stave off your own frustration. When you sit down to study, do not think about the years it will take to become a master. Roll up your metaphorical sleeping bag. Tell yourself, "Today is the day I understand a new concept." Repeat this short phrase. Focus on today. This active daily framing prevents your brain from sinking into chronic negativity. Back on the Drake Passage, the men in the James Caird have been fighting the gales for 14 agonizing days. Their navigator, Frank Worsley, has performed a miracle. Balancing on the wildly bucking boat, he has managed to glimpse the sun just enough times to calculate their position. They are miraculously approaching the coast of South Georgia Island. But the ocean is not finished with them. On the night of May 5th, 1916, Shackleton is sitting at the tiller, steering the boat through the freezing darkness. He looks behind him and sees a faint line of white clearing in the sky. He calls out to the men, telling them the storm might finally be breaking. Then, he realizes his terrible mistake. The white line is not a clearing in the clouds. It is the foaming, violently churning crest of an enormous, freak ocean wave. It is a rogue wave, a wall of water larger than any they have seen, rushing straight toward their tiny wooden boat. Listen for this verb, to engulf. It means to sweep over something so as to surround or cover it completely. Shackleton realizes this massive wave is about to completely engulf them. He screams a final warning to his men. "Hold on! For God's sake, hold on!" The mountain of water strikes the James Caird. The tiny boat is instantly buried under thousands of gallons of freezing, crushing water. The ocean lifts them up, throwing them completely into the violent white foam. The men inside hold their breath, gripping the wooden sides with bleeding fingers, waiting for the heavy boat to flip over and sink into the freezing abyss. When a wave of total negativity or failure completely engulfs your life, how do you hold on? When the physical and mental pressure is absolute, what pulls a human being back to the surface? The freezing water covers them completely. The ocean presses down like a massive dark ceiling, and the tiny wooden boat vanishes beneath the violently churning white foam. Inside the narrow space, the men hold their breath, gripping the wooden beams in absolute darkness, waiting for the ocean to swallow them forever. But the James Caird does not roll over. Miraculously, built with brilliant balance by the ship's carpenter, the heavy boat acts like a cork. It shudders violently and slowly breaks the surface of the wave. Listen for this important verb, to founder. In nautical terms, to founder means to fill with water and sink. If you founder in your English learning, it means you fail entirely and stop trying. The James Caird is foundering. The massive wave has filled the boat with freezing water up to the men's knees. There is no time to panic. There is no time to complain. Shackleton and his men instantly begin to bail the water out, using anything they can find: metal pots, sleeping bags, their own bare hands. They fight for hours in the freezing wind until the water level drops. They survive the rogue wave, but their physical strength is completely broken. Then, on May 8th, 1916, they finally see it. Through the thick, gray fog, the black cliffs of South Georgia Island appear. It is the most beautiful sight they have ever witnessed. They have successfully crossed 800 miles of the deadliest ocean on Earth. But nature is relentlessly cruel. Just as they approach the coast, a massive hurricane suddenly violently strikes the island. The winds are so intense that they cannot steer the boat toward the shore. If they get too close, the hurricane will smash their fragile wooden boat against the jagged black rocks, killing them instantly. For 2 more agonizing days, they must stay on the open water, fighting the hurricane, staring at the very land that could save them. Listen for this essential noun: setback. A setback is a sudden problem or issue that delays or completely reverses your progress. When you are learning a complex language, you will experience sudden setbacks. You might study for months, finally feel confident, and then completely fail to understand a native speaker in a real conversation. That failure is a massive emotional setback. How you react to a setback determines your ultimate success. When you face a setback, your brain naturally defaults to a negative bias. You immediately believe that all your previous effort was completely wasted. This cognitive bias tries to convince you that the goal is suddenly impossible, but you must actively control your mindset. A resilient mindset recognizes that a setback is merely a delay, not a permanent defeat. To protect your mindset during a setback, use this simple, repeatable phrase in your daily practice. I will endure the setback, and I will adjust my course. When Shackleton's men realize they cannot land safely, they endure the setback. They adjust their course. They fight the hurricane for 48 more hours. Finally, on May 10th, the wind slightly drops. The sails are torn, the rudder is badly damaged, and the boat is slowly sinking. But Shackleton steers the ruined James Caird into a small, sheltered inlet called King Haakon Bay. The boat grinds against the stones. The 6 men step out onto the freezing beach. They find a small stream of melted glacier water. They fall to their knees and drink deeply, the freezing water soothing their swollen, cracked throats. For the first time in 16 days, they are safe from the violent ocean. But their journey is not over, and the next realization is perhaps the most devastating psychological blow of the entire expedition. South Georgia Island is roughly 100 miles long. The whaling station, named Stromness, where human beings and rescue ships are located, is on the northern coast. Shackleton's ruined boat has landed on the southern coast. To reach the whaling station, they must sail around the island. However, the James Caird is falling apart. The wood is rotting and the rudder is torn. It cannot survive another day on the open ocean. This means there is only one option left. They must walk. Listen for this descriptive adjective. Formidable. It means inspiring fear or respect through being impressively large, powerful, or intense. The interior of South Georgia Island is incredibly formidable. It is bisected by the Allardyce Range, a brutal, jagged spine of heavily glaciated mountains reaching thousands of feet into the sky. In 1916, the interior of the island has never been mapped. No human being has ever attempted to cross it. It is considered a completely impassable wall of ice, deep crevasses, and screaming blizzards. Shackleton looks at the formidable mountains. He looks at his 5 exhausted men. 3 of them are far too weak to walk. They are suffering from severe exposure and cannot take another step. Shackleton realizes he must leave the 3 sick men safely under the overturned boat on the beach. He, along with Frank Worsley and Tom Crean, will attempt the impossible mountain crossing. Listen for this verb, to traverse. It means to travel across or through a difficult terrain. They must traverse an unmapped, frozen mountain range with no climbing equipment, no tent, and almost no food. If they fail, the 3 men on the beach will die. The 22 men waiting back on Elephant Island will die. Everything depends on this final, desperate walk. This is the ultimate test of human resilience. Resilience is not just surviving the ocean. It is the ability to look at a completely new, terrifying mountain immediately after surviving the ocean and deciding to take the first step anyway.
Before they begin the climb, Shackleton modifies their boots. They have no professional ice cleats, so they pull heavy brass screws from the wood of the ruined boat and force them through the thick leather soles of their boots to provide grip on the slippery ice. They pack 3 days of minimal food and 50 feet of heavy rope. At 2 a.m., under the brilliant light of a full moon, the 3 men begin to walk up into the freezing, unknown heights. They are stepping into the absolute dark of the mountains. They must traverse deep, hidden cracks in the ice, navigate deadly cliffs, and find a path where no path exists. Will they reach the top, or will the mountains finally defeat the men who conquered the sea? The moonlight casts long, terrifying shadows across an unmapped mountain of ice. 3 exhausted men step into a frozen wilderness where no human has ever walked. Every single breath burns their lungs. They have survived the crushing ice and the violent ocean, but now they face the sharp, vertical teeth of South Georgia Island. It is May 19th, 1916. Sir Ernest Shackleton, Frank Worsley, and Tom Crean are climbing into the jagged peaks of the Allardyce Range. They are roped together, stepping carefully in the dark. Below them is the freezing beach where they left 3 sick crewmates. Above them is a towering wall of rock and ice. They have no map, no tent, and only a few biscuits for food. They must rely entirely on their own judgment. For hours they climb a steep glacier, cutting steps into the ice with a small axe. As the sun rises, they reach a high ridge, hoping to see a clear path down to the whaling station on the other side. Instead, they look down and see a massive, deadly drop. A sheer cliff falls thousands of feet into a shattered valley of ice. They have chosen the wrong path. Listen for this important phrasal verb, to backtrack. It means to return over the exact same route you just took because you have reached a dead end. Shackleton realizes they cannot go forward. They must backtrack down the exhausting glacier and try to find another pass. When you learn English, you will frequently need to backtrack. You might study an advanced grammar tense, realize you completely misunderstand it, and have to backtrack to a basic lesson. In these moments, your internal confirmation bias will aggressively attack you. Your bias will whisper that backtracking is proof of failure. It will tell you that you are wasting your time. But a strong mindset requires you to reframe this completely. Backtracking is not failing, it is gathering new information. Shackleton does not complain when he sees the cliff. He does not sit down and surrender. He simply turns around. You can practice this resilience with a short, repeating phrase. A detour is not a defeat. Say it to yourself when you have to review old vocabulary. You are not failing. You are simply finding the correct path. The 3 men backtrack and climb a different peak. Again, they find a sheer drop. They backtrack a second time. Their physical energy is almost entirely gone. Finally, on their 3rd attempt, as the afternoon sun begins to vanish, they find a steep but possible slope. However, a new, deadly threat arrives. The temperature rapidly drops and a freezing mountain fog rolls in. If they spend the night at this high altitude, exposed to the wind without a tent, they will freeze to death in their sleep. But walking down the steep mountain in the pitch blackness is suicidal. They cannot see the deep cracks in the ice, called crevasses, which could swallow them whole. Shackleton is forced to make one of the most audacious decisions in exploration history. Listen for this word carefully. Audacious. It is an adjective that describes an action that is incredibly bold, daring, and surprisingly fearless. Shackleton decides that if they walk, they will die. So, they must slide. He orders Worsley and Crean to sit down in the snow. They coil their 50 feet of heavy climbing rope into a thick pad and sit on it, forming a human sled. Shackleton sits in the front, Worsley in the middle, and Crean in the back. They wrap their arms around each other. Shackleton looks down into the terrifying, absolute blackness of the mountain. He kicks his heels into the snow, pushing them forward. They plunge down the mountain in the dark. The wind screams in their ears. They slide at terrifying speeds, completely out of control, flying down 3,000 feet of mountain ice in a matter of minutes. At any second, they could hit a massive rock and be killed instantly. But the slope gradually levels out, and their speed slows. They come to a gentle stop in a soft bank of snow at the bottom of the valley. They stand up, covered in freezing snow, and realize they are entirely unhurt. They look at each other, and despite the misery, the cold, and the danger, they begin to laugh. It is an audacious laugh of pure survival. By taking a massive, calculated risk, they forcefully shattered their own stress cycles. They chose bold action over passive freezing. The three men continue to march through the night. They are entering their 32nd hour of continuous walking. Their minds are beginning to break under the sheer weight of exhaustion. Historians and the men themselves later recorded a strange psychological phenomenon during this march. Worsley and Shackleton both felt that there was a fourth man walking beside them in the mist, a strange, comforting presence created by their exhausted brains. When your body reaches its absolute limit, the brain sometimes creates coping mechanisms to endure the pain. Listen for this core verb, to persevere. It means to continue in a course of action, even in the face of immense difficulty or with little prospect of success. To persevere is the physical action of resilience. At 6:30 a.m. on May 20th, 1916, Shackleton climbs a final ridge. He stops and stares at the horizon. He tells his men to wait. He pulls out his pocket watch. It is nearly 7 a.m. In the distance, across the final valley, lies the Stromness whaling station. They stand in complete, agonizing silence, watching the tiny, distant buildings. The wind is quiet. Then, precisely at 7 a.m., a sound echoes across the icy valley. It is the high, sharp scream of a steam whistle. It is the factory whistle at Stromness, calling the whalers to begin their morning work. To you and me, a factory whistle is just an industrial noise. To Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean, it is the most beautiful music ever created. It is the first sound of the outside human world they have heard since August 1914. It is the sound of life. But the journey is still not over. They must descend a final, freezing waterfall to reach the valley floor. They must walk into the whaling station. They look like terrifying ghosts, with long, matted hair, faces black with seal oil and smoke, and rotting clothes hanging in rags. How will the outside world react to dead men walking out of the ice? And more importantly, can Shackleton find a ship in time to rescue the 22 men starving on Elephant Island before they succumb to the long, dark winter? 3 ghosts walk out of the frozen mountains. Their hair is long,
reaching past their shoulders, heavily matted with black seal oil and soot. Their clothes are rotting rags. They carry the profound, heavy scent of death and survival. As they step into the Stromness whaling station, two young boys see them and run away in absolute terror. It is May 20th, 1916. Sir Ernest Shackleton, Frank Worsley, and Tom Crean walk slowly toward the station manager's house.
An old, hardened whaler steps out to meet them. He looks at the terrifying figures in complete silence. He asks, "Who the hell are you?" Shackleton stands straight, his voice incredibly quiet but firm. He says, "My name is Shackleton." Historians record that the old whaler turned his face away and wept. Listen for this essential verb, to emerge. It means to move out of or away from something and come into view, or to survive a difficult situation. The three men have emerged from the ice. They have accomplished the impossible. They are instantly given hot food, warm baths, and clean clothes. Within hours, a whaling ship is sent around the coast of the island to safely rescue the three sick men left under the overturned James Caird on the southern beach. But Shackleton cannot rest. His mind is locked onto a single, agonizing truth. 22 of his men are still trapped on the desolate beach of Elephant Island, living under two wooden boats, freezing, starving, and waiting. This begins the final, most agonizing psychological test of the entire expedition. You might think the story ends at the whaling station, but true resilience requires continuous, relentless effort. Shackleton immediately secures a wooden ship to sail back to Elephant Island. But just miles from the island, a solid wall of sea ice blocks their path. They cannot break through. They are forced to retreat to South America. Shackleton tries a second time with a different ship. The ice blocks him again. He tries a third time. Again, the freezing ocean refuses to let him pass. Listen for this powerful adjective. Unfathomable. It means completely impossible to understand or measure. The psychological torture of these failed rescue attempts is unfathomable. Shackleton knows his men are slowly dying. Every single day that passes feeds his deep internal stress cycle. It would be entirely natural for him to surrender to a negative bias, to believe that the ocean simply will not let him win. But Shackleton aggressively utilizes his own mental habits. He refuses to accept learned helplessness. He actively reframes every failure. He tells his crew, "We will find another ship. We will go again." He repeats this short phrase to stave off his own despair. Meanwhile, back on Elephant Island, the 22 men are living out their own impossible story of mental endurance. Frank Wild, the second in command, is fighting a desperate war against the darkness. The men are suffering from severe frostbite. Their food is almost completely gone. The Antarctic winter is at its absolute coldest. Listen for this noun. Vigil. A vigil is a period of keeping awake during the time usually spent asleep, especially to keep watch or pray. To keep their mindset from shattering, Frank Wild continues his relentless daily habit. Every single morning, no matter how cold the wind screams, he gives his men a short story prompt. He rolls up his sleeping bag and shouts, "The boss may come today!" He completely bans any talk of failure. He actively suppresses social comparison by forcing the men to share everything equally, down to the last piece of seal meat. He demands daily reflection, asking the men to focus only on the immediate tasks of survival. Finally, on August 30th, 1916, Shackleton secures a small, steel-hulled tugboat from the Chilean government, named the Yelcho. For the fourth time, he sails south into the violent Drake Passage. And this time, the winter ice has slightly broken apart. The Yelcho navigates through the frozen maze. Through the thick, gray, freezing fog, the black peaks of Elephant Island finally emerge. Shackleton stands at the front of the Yelcho, holding a pair of binoculars with trembling hands. As the boat approaches the narrow, rocky beach, he sees a tiny speck of movement. Then, another. The men are crawling out from under the overturned lifeboats. They are waving pieces of ragged cloth tied to old oars. Shackleton stares through the glass. His heart is pounding wildly in his chest. He begins to count the figures on the beach. He counts loudly, his voice cracking with emotion. 1, 2, 3... He counts all the way to 22. He lowers the binoculars, turns to his captain, and speaks the most beautiful sentence of his life. They are all there. Not a single man was lost. Against mathematically impossible odds, 28 men survived. Facing an open stress cycle that lasted nearly 2 years, enduring the total destruction of their ship, drifting on melting ice, crossing the deadliest ocean on Earth in a rowboat, and traversing an unmapped mountain range. They did not survive purely because they were physically strong. They survived because they conquered the human mind. They survived because Sir Ernest Shackleton understood that the most dangerous traps are not made of ice. They are made of negativity. This brings us back to you and your own journey. Learning a complex language like English is an expedition. It is a long, difficult crossing. You will face intense gales of confusion. You will hit plateaus where the ice seems completely frozen and your progress stops. You will experience the deep, crushing weight of social comparison when you hear others speak fluently. You will fight confirmation bias when you make mistakes. But you now hold the exact map to survive. When your biology triggers an open stress cycle and you feel entirely overwhelmed by a textbook or a conversation, do not succumb to learned helplessness. Do not become passive. Take a calculated risk and take one small action. Write one sentence. Speak one word out loud. When your mind wants to surrender to the dark, actively reframe your thoughts. Repeat short, powerful phrases to yourself. Focus on the next step. A detour is not a defeat. Action cures fear. Practice daily reflection. Protect your mindset by forcing yourself to find one small victory every single day. Use a gratitude practice to reset your brain, thanking yourself simply for the effort you gave. Give yourself a positive short story prompt about your future fluency, and let that story guide your daily routine. You are the captain of your own ship. The gales will blow and the ice will shift, but if you master your internal compass, no setback can permanently stop you. You have the resilience to traverse any mountain. Never forget the motto of the endurance.
carry it with you into your studies and into your life. By endurance, we conquer.